been looking forward to this. So I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship without infrastructure. And what I mean about that is that we're in a very uncertain time and there's a lot of things in the economy that we don't understand. And what I've been doing for the last 10 years is just doing startups, but then doing it wherever it's difficult. Wait, I'll just need to close the door. So for instance, I did the startup bus. So that's where I met Michael Healy. And the startup bus is this hackathon that you do on the road and you're going for 72 hours and basically just trying to start a startup. But the thing is, you don't have sleep, you don't have good food, there's a lot of things that you're missing. So you have to do all of this in an environment of just uncertainty, right? And that's just really challenging, but it's also really fun because you just learn to work in a new way and you have to kind of call people. You have to figure out what's a good time to call people. It's different if you do it over the weekend compared to if you do it during weekdays. It's different. Like when we were doing the startup bus, we missed a bunch of stops. I was organizing it and then we were driving from Düsseldorf to Berlin. And when we got to Berlin, we got to the wrong address. And then we had to take the train across town. And we kind of just realized all these issues as we went along. And when I did startup bus, first I did US, then I did Europe, I organized it. Then I did Europe again, and then we did one in Africa. And how that worked was we just found someone who wanted to be the champion of this in Africa. And then we just kind of went through all the issues. And when I say doing a road trip in Africa, it's like we were stopped in front of Robert Mugabe's house, which is just a crazy thing. Let me just see this chat. So that's just a crazy thing. We were stopped, there were guys with machine guns on the bus. And then the next day we were driving to South Africa and we didn't really consider that the internet was super shit and we ran out of, we had the power supply for our laptops went bad. Then after that, we wanted to do one in Israel and Palestine. And that just turned out to be impossible because it's just like, have you guys ever been there? It's just sort of like, there's all this division, there's wars, there's all these infrastructure challenges, but it did end up going to mentor at a startup weekend in Gaza. And the way that worked was I traveled to Israel. And then after a couple of days, we just crossed the border into Gaza. We had permission from the Israeli military to exit through that terminal. And we had permission on the Gaza side to enter. And then it was just going there. And I kind of learned about this issue as I went back after the war. It's 2015 and 14. I went back after the war and you just kind of see that, okay, here's people who are doing a startup, but they don't really have reliable internet. They can't order stuff because there's a blockade. So it's just like economically, it's really difficult. They can't export stuff. They have like intermittent power, even like simple things like water, sewage. It's just like a disaster. But these guys still found a way to make it work because they just find like the one place in the city and then they go there with their laptops and then they just work until like whatever hours is required. So someone is like in the middle of a war sitting in Gaza on an interview with Dave McClure in San Francisco as the bombs are dropping around them, as there's a power cut and they get a SIM card so that they can connect to the 3G on the Israeli side. And this is sort of like really terrifying in one way. It's sort of like there's so much evil in the world, but at the same time, there's also just so much resilience where you kind of just realize that there are things you think you can depend on it. You think that, of course, if I go down to FedEx, I mail a package. Of course, we all know how it works. I mail something halfway around the world. And as soon as I've handed it in, they get a text and they can track the package as it arrives to them. We were doing that over Easter. My friend, he handed in a package Easter on Wednesday before Easter, hands in a package in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And I get the text confirmation on Monday. And then it arrives the following Monday on the 20th because we just couldn't rely on package service. Everyone was like, you can just use FedEx, you can just use DHL. And I'm saying no, because these things are just flown on airplanes that are all grounded. So it's like you cannot even send stuff around the world anymore. So we had to work through that. We've just been calling embassies. We've been calling everyone to just kind of figure out what was going on. And now we've come to a point where on Monday and Tuesday, my cousin is going to write some articles. He's already written some articles. He's going to publish some articles. about just how few flights there were when the lockdown was really the strictest at the beginning, where people just grounded all the flights and then didn't realize just how much cargo was on those flights, and no one's actually tracking this in the world. And that's something where we think about infrastructure, we think about roads, but what about how do you trade masks today when you have a factory that wants to sell some masks and you have someone who wants to buy some masks, but no one's going to finance the trade? How do you go from A to B? I think it's something that's really terrifying, because I think, and this is also where I want to open up the discussion. I would love to hear your thoughts on some of this, and we can have a more open discussion, what's happening in the world. But on one hand, it's sort of like when no one was looking, there was this critical thing, which was diplomatic exchange, and that was international trade that just fell apart. So we called the embassy, I called the embassy, the Danish embassy in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and I don't receive an answer. And then I call the foreign service in Denmark, and turns out that all the diplomats have been sent home. And so I'm like, okay, I'm sitting here. I can't travel out to meet someone. I can't ship a package. I can't even get my diplomatic service to go and check. And even during World War II, there was diplomatic exchange. When you had the Romans, they had embassies in China. Marco Polo, obviously, he traded across China and Europe. I think we just never had a time like this where you just couldn't trade, where that's been so difficult to just trade. And you also kind of realize in this that a lot of what we depend on is like, for instance, if I go and buy, like, I have some sports gear, so it's like Nike, but actually Nike, they just kind of contract with factories in Bangladesh, and the factories just send the stuff directly to the United States. So then that is something that's just kind of interesting. It's like, okay, you have these companies with these like storefronts everywhere, and they don't even make their own stuff. So they just have some leases, and then they buy some stuff in Bangladesh. And when we kind of figured that out, it's sort of like, okay, what else is there for the taking? Because you have these, you just have this infrastructure that I can trade, and I can have finance, and I can send money around the world, and I can call around the world, and I can fly around the world. And now we're just kind of faced with the reality that I can't fly around the world. And I have to rely on package service, and I have to go on phone calls because I can't just see my friends. So we have a very changed world in a way that allows us to work together in new ways. But I think we should also consider what allows us to work on projects, new kinds of projects, where we just say, okay, what does it actually take to solve climate change? How do we actually make a world for 10 billion people? How do we stop fighting over land and water? I think those are the questions that where I really think entrepreneurs can make a difference now, because it's sort of like we have to consider what is going on in the world here. Like, what do we rely on, and can we really rely on it? And sometimes we have to test, and we have to say, okay, is anyone actually working in this office? It's like, who has found out, like, even if you start calling like newspapers, it's sort of like a lot of them, they don't, they can't forward calls from their front desk because everyone is working from home. That seems pretty stupid. But also, if everyone is working from home, you can just hire people from around the world, and then maybe you want to work on a new kind of project. And that sort of like is a great equalizing opportunity, because you just say, okay, we make a new kind of infrastructure for trade. And I've discovered a lot of people that I've talked to over the past 10 years of my startup career, where we kind of come back and we're saying, okay, these were the ideas we were working on 5 or 6 years, 8 years ago. This is actually really interesting, like vertical farming. It's sort of like, okay, what's going to happen with vertical farming, and how do we scale that, and what's the opportunities with it really? Energy, I think oil crash, that's sort of like, it's just very interesting, because we might be happy from a climate perspective that the oil economy is kind of dying, but if you just look at the practical reality of the world is we have an energy system that's based on oil, so we have to find something else to replace oil with. That also creates a big opportunity in biomass. And I would really like, if anyone want to just jump in, if anyone has questions or comments, let's open up the floor. You can write in the chat. It's kind of weird, I can't see any of you. Are you there, Jonathan? kind of want to hear what you guys want to hear about.